We are in John chapter 12 this morning, and it's page 872, 873 in your Bibles in the pews. We are rapidly racing towards Easter, and so this morning we're going to talk about real or authentic worship from an interesting story that actually occurs a few days before Palm Sunday. And I want you to sort of put everything on hold that you think you know about worship as we talk about this. And it is, if you've been here for some time, at least a somewhat familiar story. When you've been, I feel like because I've over 20 plus years of doing this, there are so many stories of the Bible that I have been through, that I have even done messages on. And then I'll go and I'll read it and I'll think, wow, I never saw that before. After being to school and the whole 9 yards, I'm like, this is crazy, because you always wind up seeing more things as you go in here. But we're taking this from John chapter 12, and I'm going to begin reading in verse 1. 6 days, we're reading from the New International Version, by the way, if you're on a device. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here, a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As a keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. And then I'm going to go ahead and read the rest of these verses down to verse 11, because I like what happens after this. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priest made plans to kill Lazarus as well. Well, obviously you can't kill Lazarus. For on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. And let's pray. Father, as always, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. And we'll thank you for it in Christ's name. Amen. Most of you know I grew up going to church, but not with my parents. It was because of the Christian school that I was in. And of course, in the time that we were in, people, got dressed up, and they came to church, and everybody put their best clothes on, and they put their best face on. I'm always reminded of what Zig Ziglar used to say about hypocrites, that a hypocrite is someone who's not themselves on Sunday. Let that sink in. Because there's somebody else okay, we'll just keep going. But there's somebody else all the rest of the week, but on Sunday, you see this whole different view of them. And so I remember there was a guy that would come in, and he had his tie on, and he had his suit on, and he had a Bible, the 90-pound Bible that would choke a mule. Man, I mean, that thing was huge. And his one son seemed to be a bit troubled. And his son would talk in youth group, because I was working in an older group, and I was working with some of the younger guys. And his son would tell these fanciful stories about his father and about physical abuse. And none of us ever saw any side of him. We thought, he's just trying to get his dad in trouble, because see, his dad prayed. His dad had a smile on his face. His dad carried a Bible. His dad wore a tie. His dad looked the part. And nobody listened to him. And it turned out he was telling the truth. It's a shame, because we have heard stories, and if you've been in churches long enough, you may have even experienced stories of somebody that you thought they were one thing, but they were really somebody else. And that's the reason, as we've said so often, people, I'm not going to go to church because there's hypocrites, because of all of these kinds of things. And a lot of times we've seen these folks that we've been with over the years, and we've watched it happen. We see it happen in leadership. We see it happen with pastors. We see it happen with people in the church. We see it happening all over the place. And I think that sometimes what's happened is we have mistaken attending a worship service for worship, because we go to church. We even call this a worship service in which we have worship music. And we put worship music on a screen, and we have a guitar, and we have drums. In the past, we've had keyboards, and in the past, we've had piano. And many, many years ago, and I think there's probably only one person that remembers us having an organ, and that's Vince. We had an organ. We used to sit right over here. So we've had all different types of music. So we talk about attending a worship service. And so often we will come to church and we say, I came to church, I sang, I listened to the word, I took notes, I attended a worship service, therefore I have worshiped God. And nothing can be further from the truth. I get people that will often say to me, I don't have to come to church to worship God. Man, they're right. You really don't have to come to church to worship God. You can worship God out on the water. It's a good place for me to worship God. I can worship God in the water. Given my druthers, I'd worship Him in the woods. There's a lot of places that I can actually worship God, but there's more to worship than even that. Worship is something that's totally different that I don't think that we've really understood. I mistook for years coming to church as worshiping God, because you and I can actually come to church and not worship. When you're in my position, or you're in the position of the guys that are doing this on Sunday morning, we're thinking about everything. Okay, now we got to make sure they make sure the chords are right and the drums are right, and then you got Elena's back there and Pam are back there. They're working on the sound, and everybody's trying to make sure that we're trying to create the experience. And I'm working on the sermon and all of that. And sometimes I leave church and I go, okay, I led in worship, but I'm not sure that I actually worshiped. I don't think there's a better place for us to look at what really true worship is all about, and really what the purpose of it is, than what happens in this story. This story, let me give you a little bit of the setting, has occurred, as I already said a little earlier, this story occurs just before Palm Sunday. But of course, after Lazarus has been raised from the dead. And of course, raising a guy from the dead sort of creates a little bit of stir, especially among the Jewish leaders. They're like, what are we going to do now? Because remember, it was 4 days. And Mary and Martha were like, no, he probably stinks by now. And Jesus said, just open it up. Then He said, loose him and let him go. An extraordinary event occurs here in John chapter 12 that we've already read. And I want to look at that to really show us what real worship is all about. And what we think real worship is all about is, I think, something totally different. So we're going to take a look in this story at what happens. Now, this dinner is being given in Jesus' honor. Now, I think it's interesting, because if you look at that, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus comes to Bethany, where Lazarus lived. Now, we don't necessarily, if you look at the other accounts, by the way, you can jot this down somewhere, or in Matthew 26 and Mark 14, and we're actually using John as our basis. I'm not going to turn back and forth to those passages, but we are going to take some things from those passages and work them in here, and we'll talk about them, but you can read them on your own. Those are the corresponding, we're add a few other details that John doesn't in his story for particular reasons. But it's being held, not necessarily where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived, but it's in the town where they lived. And notice it says here, a dinner was given in what? In Jesus' what? In Jesus' honor. He was in His honor. My wife likes to cook when she can, and she likes to entertain when she can, when she's in town. She's got a very hectic travel schedule, and it's only getting worse. But I know, I think about Thanksgiving. Man, Thanksgiving, when the family's coming over, you should see the table. I mean, she's got the dishes just so, and the decorations just so, and even the seating. When somebody comes in, it's like, okay, that window, it may get a little hot looking at the time of the day that we're eating, so you may want to move down here. So then one of us that lives there, which is now just me with her, has to go down to the other end where the sun's beating down on you at that moment, right by the hot window. But we can't let the guests do that, because they are the guests. She'll even ask the guests, now, what can you eat? What can you not eat? Can you have this? Can you not have that? We got to. So there's all of this prep work that goes into it, because the guests are there to be honored. A lot of thought goes into the guest coming. So we don't know who all is here. What we do know is some of the people that are there. Simon the leper, we know, is there, and it may have even been his house that they're at. And so you've got Simon the leper, you've got probably some of his family, you've got Mary, and you've got Martha, and you've got Lazarus, and you've got Jesus, and you've got probably all of his disciples, maybe some of Jesus' family. This is a big deal. And so here is this event in Jesus' honor, and it might be being staged, which we can see from the context, because of what happened in John 11. Again, you raise somebody for the dead, that kind of gets out. You don't need Facebook to get that out. You know, that kind of spreads rather quickly. Boom. You talk about going viral. Hey, by the way, Lazarus was dead for 4 days and Jesus raised him and everybody checked him out and it was some real stuff. That has a tendency to get out, right? And so this is being given in Jesus' honor. He is, please remember this, the honored guest at the dinner. How many times do we, in our worship, forget the one that we're supposed to be honoring? I sent a meme out this week, and then I got to thinking about it. This doesn't usually happen here, although some of you are a little sensitive about your seats where you're at, but you would never, like, if a visitor comes, you're not going to like, oh, you can't sit there, that's my seat. But it was a meme where these people that have been in the church for 40 years are standing there looking at the visitors, waiting for them to move because they were in their seat. Some of you have been there, you've been in churches where people are more concerned about their seat than who's coming. They're more concerned about the offering. They're more concerned about, folks, the paint. In Baptist churches, they used to be concerned about whether the toilet tissue in the bathroom was over or under. By the way, that was settled. You know, the patent is it was for over. Just so you know that. I just want to settle that once and for all. You think I'm kidding. People focus on the dumbest things. They focus on furniture. You could move a communion table. Would you move the communion table before? Now we don't have that here, but I know I've heard of it happening where they move the communion table. What's going on? What happened to Jesus? What happened to the honored guest? Sometimes we get so busy coming to a worship service that it's easy to forget the honored guest. But they were busy. They were doing things. And I think it's interesting that, now I want you to see this. Here, a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. And notice what it says. What are the next words? What's it say? Martha served. Anybody remember what happened with Martha in Luke 10? Jesus comes to their house. Martha's getting everything ready. She's prepping. And Mary's in there talking to Jesus and listening to him. And she comes out and says, Jesus, why don't you say something to her? I'm in here doing all the work. I'm in here doing all the prep. And she's just sitting here listening to you. And Jesus says, Martha, you are distracted by many things. But Mary has chosen the one thing. And this won't be taken from her. So here's Martha serving again. This time, we don't see her arguing about it, but she's just serving. And Lazarus. But we just kind of, I just read past that. Lazarus was reclining at the table with him. But he was dead not too long ago. This is the guy that Jesus called out of the grave and said, loose him and let him go. And now here's Lazarus sitting at the table, reclining next to Jesus. This is a big deal. This is a miracle that had happened right in their midst. And most of these people had probably seen this. They know him. This is not a big, huge town. So Lazarus is sitting there at the table, reclining at the table with him. Then, here it goes. See, things are going okay. Everything's going fine. Dinner's being served. Dinner's being prepped. Jesus is in his place of honor. Lazarus is here. All the fun is going on. The party's happening, and then the party comes to a screeching, boom, halt. You ever had that happen? You're in the middle of the party, and all of a sudden a crazy aunt or uncle does something, and you go, oh. Everybody was doing fine. Everything's okay. We're just enjoying dinner. Then Mary took about a pint. Now, the way the New International Version translates this is interesting. I hear nard and I think lard. I don't know why it is. I mean, don't ask me why, but it says she takes about a pint of pure nard. Nard does not sound like Givenchy. Okay? It doesn't sound like oil of Olay. It doesn't sound like something that you're going to get that's going to be nice and expensive. It's like, what if you went home and you said, honey, I bought you a pint of nard perfume? It doesn't sound right. But understand, this was some expensive stuff. Expensive stuff. Maybe worth as much as $10,000. Days and days and years of wages. And so Mary comes in, and now, first of all, the reason why this came to a screeching halt is, number one, Mary, why are you in here with us? Number one. And number two, it says she takes the expensive perfume, and what does she do? She starts pouring it on Jesus' feet. And she wiped her feet with her hair. Okay, now we got a problem. We have a certified problem at this point. Because Mary starts to anoint him. And if you look at the other passages, she not only anoints his feet, but she's anointed his head, and it's probably running down to his feet. And then she takes off her head covering, which you did not do. Women did this at home when they were relaxed or when they were going to be intimate with their husbands. This was actually an act that, don't take this too far, it was an act of showing how much she loved Jesus. You certainly didn't take your hair down at this kind of a gathering. Now, I did some research. I thought, I wonder if this is where they think, come on, man, let your hair down. I wonder if that's where this came from. It actually came from the 17th century. Because the same thing happened in the 17th century when a woman would wear her hair in a bun of some type. Then she would only let that hair down when she was relaxed in her home. So a lot of it may have come from this time. So here's Mary. So I'm sure they're like, then she takes her hair and starts touching Jesus. She's touching him. She's got her hair down. Speechless. You just don't do this sort of thing. And the house, you smelled it everywhere. What's that place that Kirkland Home Store that you go to, Pam? I can't. No offense to Kirkland's. I love you guys if you watch this on YouTube. I got to be careful now. But I can't stand to be in your store very long. The smell is overwhelming. When I come out of there, I feel like I smell like Kirkland's. Pam got in the car yesterday and I said, you smell like Kirkland's. When something is wafting through the house, if you've ever burned something, you can smell it. If something smells, where you go, if you get to where you don't come in and something's being cooked and you go, ooh, that's steak, or ooh, that's pizza, or ooh, that's something else. This fragrance filled the entire house. Everybody's smelling it. I'm sure that people that were out, that weren't at the table, that maybe were prepping, were like, what in the world's going on? Now, so you would think at this point that, she's poured it on Jesus' feet. The house is filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So you're thinking at some point, somebody would have went, Mary, can you put your hair back up? Mary, can you take your hands off of him? This is just not appropriate. Mary, It's not right. Nope. That's not it. But one of his disciples, Judas, who was later to betray him, objected. Not over her touching him, not over her letting her hair down, not over what they think is inappropriate behavior. No. It's over the money. Why wasn't this perfume sold? And the money given to the, doesn't that sound good? And the money given to the poor. It's worth a year's wages. Now, John says, of course, he didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As a keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to put in it. He would take some, and one for them, and two for him, and one for them, and three for him, and that's how he did things. Now, it's interesting because if you read the other gospel accounts, Judas wound up being the spokesman for the rest of the people that are there going, what in the world is she doing? She has just wasted a ton of this, and it would have been better if this would have been given to the poor. Why are you wasting it here? Folks, do you ever realize that it's almost always, besides hypocrisy, about the money? Do you realize that unbelievers, you know how many times I've had this happen when I've been in, most of the time an agnostic or atheist, within the first 2 or 3 questions, it will be something to this effect. How come the church is building all those buildings when they could have given money for the poor? Do you know that a lot of church fights are often about money? It's always about the money. And nobody wants to argue with somebody and say, well, you give to the poor. Oh, that sounds good, man. Why aren't we giving to the poor? Meanwhile, that's not the motive at all, because if somebody wants to give to the poor, then give to the poor. What's the issue? His motivation was all off. Judas could have cared less about the poor. And most times when you hear other people that are saying, well, how come you're spending that money? They don't care about it either. So they are focused totally on the wrong thing. So here they are arguing about the money, and so you notice what happens. I love what Jesus says. So they're all arguing, and I love Jesus. They're waiting for Jesus. Well, Jesus, he's going to speak. He's going to speak. He's going to say something about this, because surely he cares about the poor. I love what Jesus does. He goes, hey, leave her alone. What? Wait, what? Verse 7. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. Then he says, you will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. Now, the additional accounts of the gospel, both in Matthew 26 and Mark 14, then say this. I'm going to paraphrase it. In fact, whenever this gospel is preached, Jesus said, what Mary has done will be told, listen to this, as a memorial to her. What? What do you mean a memorial to her? And see, here's the cool thing. Here we are reading the Gospels in March of 2018, and we're talking about Mary worshiping Jesus at the most inopportune time, violating every cultural, every religious rule that they possibly had, and what seemed like a waste, and she gave it all to him. But I love that part, that it's going to be a memorial, and a memorial is a remembrance. A memorial and a remembrance is a testimony to what the person has done. And so here is our lesson, if you want to sum it up in a nutshell. Worship is not an end in itself. Worship is a witness. I want you to just think about that for a moment. Your worship is witnessing to other people. See, because what we aspire worth to is what we worship. What we think is worth something. In fact, you've heard me say this before, but I'm going to add one. I'm going to add a new one today. So this is new information in case you've heard me say this before. We've always said before that you could tell what is important to somebody if you could look in their checkbook and you look at their calendar. You look at where they're spending their money and where they're spending their time. I'm going to add a third one, a third C. You know what's important to somebody by what's in their checkbook, by what is on their calendar, and by what they communicate. What is it that they talk about all the time? You could watch social media and see what's important to people. It may be their cat, it may be their dog, it may be they're pro-Trump, they may be anti-Trump, it may be whatever, and it's constant. What is it you talk about? Where do you spend your money? Where do you spend your time? Because see, that's where it shows what is worth, what it was worth to us. We're giving worth to that. Your worship is a witness. Your worship is what's leaving behind a legacy for other people. So what do we learn from Mary? I'm going to give you 3 quick things and I'll be done. First of all, I want you to notice something about the worship. The worship should, first of all, and you heard me point this out earlier, should be thoughtful. Everything that they did about this thing where they were honoring Jesus was thought through. I know there's spontaneous worship, but it was something where they were being thoughtful about the guy who they were honoring. They kept Jesus in their mind. They didn't lose the fact that there was an honored guest. Now, they got into the ritual. They got into, okay, we got to get to dinner. We got busy. We're doing all this stuff. But Mary all of a sudden brings everything to a screeching halt because she puts it back on Jesus. They're like, well, you're spending a lot of money on Jesus there. We could give that to the poor. What's she doing that for? And once again, Mary shows us that she got the point. She got the point before in Luke 10. You can read the story where she's focusing on Jesus and Martha's so busy prepping and making sure that everything is ready. He's like, she is focused on me. And they were all contributing to this, but Mary did it all. Thoughtful, honored. So my question is, who are we honoring in our worship? Are we honoring Jesus? Or are we honoring ritual or a tradition or the way we've always done it or the way we think things should be or whatever? Is it thoughtful? There's another interesting thing which you can see here. It's pretty obvious. Our worship should also be sacrificial. I'm not saying you have to give everything you've got. But this was some serious stuff. I mean, it's one thing to prepare the meal. It's another thing to take this perfume and take it and give it all to him and spend it. And people are like, my gosh, that's excessive. I think sometimes we don't understand excessive sacrifice in our Western culture. We really don't. Man, we can get in the car or get on a bike or walk to church. Nobody. I mean, there's crazy people out there with guns and stuff that have shot churches up. But the government's not coming in here to tell us you can't do this. We don't have to hide underground with a page of the Bible and then have to rip it up and tear it up and try to memorize it and then throw it. We don't have to do that. We're not threatened. So I don't know that we truly understand pure sacrifice today. Some have sacrificed their lives for the gospel. You think of missionaries that did that for Jim Elliot. He was the guy that with the Aka tribe, and that they were the tribe were cannibals, and it was Jim Elliot that said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. But I don't know that we truly understand the sacrifice. I think about, I'm into storytelling. I don't mean telling like lies, but actual true storytelling and watching it. And it's amazing. People won't sit. They're not going to sit that long. I saw an argument on Facebook one time about sermons should be shorter because people won't sit that long. Folks, I was in a movie last night for 2.5 hours and I didn't budge. Usually I get up at least once. I didn't budge. Don't tell me we won't sit for something that's important to us. So we don't understand sacrifice, but our worship should be sacrificial. Third, our worship, like Mary, should be expressive. It should be expressive to the point that it's challenging other people. We express so much. We express our opinions on social media. We hit share. We put stuff out there. We express our support. Everybody knows how this church is. I warn people that are coming here that are new, be careful during football season because it ain't pretty. Never has been, you know. We're expressive about our teams, you know. We're expressive about so many things. So the question is, are we expressive about Jesus? It doesn't mean you got to be a jerk. See, the problem is that people that are out there that think they're going to argue folks into the kingdom. You're not going to do that. Mary was talked about not because she got up there and got in everybody's face. She just focused on Jesus. She expressed her love and her worship for him. And sometimes it's just going to be us doing the right thing at the right time. Just being who we're supposed to be over and over and over again. Our whole life should be about worship. It can't just be relegating it here. We come together and we worship, and it's true. You can worship God with anywhere you want, but you know, when we come here together, we're worshiping together, and it connects us not only to God, but it connects us to one another. And that worship winds up creating a witness to this community. It creates a witness to the people that are next to us. It creates a witness to the folks who are around us in our community. Worship is a witness to other people. It's so much more than just attending a service. I don't want to give it away, and I know some of you went and saw the movie. I can only imagine. We decided at the last minute to go see it. All I can tell you is go watch the movie because it really tells the journey of somebody who, you know, is basically writing a worship song, but the story behind that. Because see, here's the thing. There's always a story behind our worship. There's always something that winds up inspiring us to get to the point to where we are. There's a journey that's going on where Jesus intersects with that journey, and then all of a sudden we look back and we're just grateful for what he's done, and it flows. That's what happened with Mary, and that's what should happen to us. It should be because he's intersected with us and he's touched us in so many different ways. And so now all we can do is express it. All we can do is express it. And when we do, our worship will be a witness like Mary's. Let's pray.